Hello, peeps. This is the Hillbilly Halfwit, and today we're doing something a little bit different than normal because I am 52 and I remember all this contaminated blood thing starting when I was a kid, and I followed it all through my life. And I'm pretty disgusted at how lots of these people involved in it haven't had them been named, or they haven't. The companies involved haven't been had. Nobody's lost any money. Nobody's been sacked. So I thought I'd just talk you through the contaminated haemophilia blood products and what happened on Wikipedia. Now, you'll see a lot of it on the news at the moment. Uh, but when I was in my early teens, everybody knew about this. Everybody knew that they were because AIDS was about, and if you weren't around at that time, I'm sure some of you watch this were. It was incredibly scary. Now, I was in my teens, and we were literally scared to death about being with other people. And if you didn't have a condom or anything like that, you were absolutely terrified of if you'd catch AIDS or something, because there was adverts on television constantly, and I mean it was like coronavirus. That's the only thing I can explain what it was like. It was like that, and it was crazy. And if the government now had acted like they did with the coronavirus at the AIDS time, they'd have been locking people up, gay people, and all sorts. It would have been. It's unreal. At the time, it was a very scary time for us teenagers, I got to say, and that's why I thought I'd say something about this. Now, if you haven't already, please comment, rate, and subscribe to my channel, because we're always talking about something from farming to anything like this. So let's start with this. What really happened, from what my understanding is, haemophiliacs were having problems, and then they uh, made this new process of getting blood ready for everybody. And what they were doing was taking blood off people in America all over the place, in the ghettos, in lots of areas of gay places, in lots of um, uh, prisons and whatever. And they were just taking the blood. I know this sounds crazy, but there was a documentary all about it years and years ago. They were putting it into a big cauldron, the equivalent of a big cauldron, and mixing it all together, and then freezing this stuff. I think they uh, were they turning it into some kind of a powder, or I forget now. But basically, it make if one person in all of them that contamination had AIDS or anything like that, it was passed throughout the whole lot. Now that was bad enough. These companies were making a fortune out of this, and then they in the UK there was private schools having doctors were experimenting on the kids there with this stuff and not telling them that they'd given them this plasma, and it had given them AIDS, and it had given. It was incredible. I mean, well, let me read through it. A lot of people won't believe what has been going on. I won't read all of this. I'll just try to show you what was the main things. Now, this is from Wikipedia. The contaminated haemophilia blood products were a serious public health problem in the late 1970s up to 1985. Haemophilia causes a deficiency factor, a protein required for blood clotting. Factor factor 8 injections were a common treatment to prevent or stop bleeding in people with haemophilia. Contamination of these and other products caused large numbers of haemophiliacs to become infected with HIV or hepatitis C. The companies involved included Alpha Therapeutic Corporation, Institute Myrix, which then became Krone Pulanek Aurora. God, that's a weird name, isn't it? And is now part of Sanofi, Bayer Corporation, and its Cutter Biological Division, and Baxter International and its Highland Pharmaceutical Division. Estimates for HIV infections in the United States alone range from 6,000 to 10,000, with another 4,000 in France, 2,000 in Canada, and 1,200 in the United Kingdom, and many more worldwide. That was a tip of the iceberg. It was unreal. And lots of these doctors knew it was happening. Now, I listened to a journalist talking about a lady who originally got this article and got this story, and she was at a conference, an NHS conference, and she noticed that a lot of people were milling outside talking and are getting pretty furious. So she went outside to talk to them, and it was this. That's when she first got the story, and then she started investigating it, and then she pretended to be a blood specialist and going to interview a doctor with a secret microphone on. Now, he basically told them that this was getting people infected with everything you can think of, from HIV, and he was mortified about this, that nobody was saying more about it. Eventually, after a while, she became friends with this guy, and he became a whistleblower, and they put this story out in the Mail, and basically the whole of the establishment threatened the Mail and stopped them from saying bugger all about it. But she kept on with this story, all through the years. But the establishment basically didn't want any of the doctors or any of the corporations involved to admit to it. So the corporations involved said in the 1985, I think it was, that they would never admit to doing this and never admit anything in a court case, because they would have to pay out not only on this, on many, many other things that they've done. And it would be a case where they could go back to. That was why this was never, until now. Lots of the people involved, the doctors and the people involved in the companies, are dead now. That's why it's come out now. That's the only reason. So let's see if we can go through it a bit more. People should be in prison over this, especially in the civil service. Lots of the paperwork involved was destroyed and all sorts, but it was all to do with the big companies, really. In 1981, concern was growing over unidentified infectious diseases associated with the immune system collapse that would later become known as AIDS. In the US, it was found mostly in homosexual men and intravenous drug users, while in France, a more diverse group of patients was affected. Reports that 3 haemophiliacs had acquired the disease started to believe that the disease has been widespread through blood products, with grave implications for haemophiliacs, who had routinely been treated with concentrate made from large pools of donated plasma, as I said before, much of which was collected by commercial paid donor plasma therapists prior to routine HIV testing, often in US cities that had large numbers of homosexuals and intravenous drug users, and in some US prisons and underdeveloped countries during the 4 or 5 years of the late 1970s through to the early 1980s, before AIDS was discovered and recognized as a public health concern. Now, people aren't saying much about this, but maybe this spread AIDS all over the Western world. I got to be honest with you, this is never mentioned. As a teen back then, most of us were absolutely terrified. It was as if somebody spit or anything like that, were contaminated with. You were told at that time that you could catch it, and thankfully, I didn't know anybody anyway for sure that had it, but lots of people caught it and died, didn't they? In January 1983, a manager of plasma procurement for Bear Cutter Biological Division acknowledged in a letter that there is strong evidence to suggest that AIDS is passed on to other people through plasma products. So that was in 1983, 50 years ago. In March 1983, the CDC warned that blood products would appear responsible for AIDS among haemophilia patients. By May 1983, a Cutter rival began making a heat-treated concentrate in France, decided to halt all imports of clotting factor concentrates. Cutter feared losing customers, so according to an internal memo, Cutter wanted to give the impression that they continuously improving the product without telling them. They expected soon to have a heat-treated concentrate. The process rendered the virus undetectable in the product, according to a government study. By June 1983, Qatar letter to distributors. Qatar is a big company. Basically, they produce these names to hide the name. It's Bayer, really, as we said before. Bayer Corporation. Even these people writing this are scared of saying anything about these companies. By June 93, a Qatar letter to distributors in France and 20 other countries said that AIDS has become the centre of irrational response in many countries, and this is of particular concern to us because of unsubstantiated speculations that this syndrome may be transmitted by certain blood products. France continued using the older style, untreated concentrate till August 1983. Continued sales. On February 29th, 1984, Qatar became the last of the four major blood companies to get US approval to sell heated concentrate. Even after Qatar began selling the new product for several months until August 1984, the company continued making the old medicine. One reason was that the company had several fixed price contracts and believed that the old product would be cheaper to produce. It's money as usual. Bayer it is. Bayer officials, before responding on behalf of Qatar, issued a statement stating that Qatar continued to sell the old medicine because some customers doubted the new drug's effectiveness and because some countries were slow to approve the sale. The company said that a shortage of plasma used to make the medicine had kept Qatar from manufacturing more product. Bayer officials also claimed that an overall plasma shortage in 1985 kept Qatar from making more heat-treated medicine. Well, you actually get the gist of this, don't you? They're hiding the tracks, aren't they? That is what has happened. Now, the United States Food and Drug Administration helped to keep the news out of the public eye. In late 84, when a Hong Kong distributor asked Qatar about the newer product, records show that Qatar asked the distributor to use up stocks of the old medicine before switching to its safer, better product. Several months later, once haemophiliacs in Hong Kong began testing positive for HIV, and some local doctors began to question whether Qatar was dumping AIDS-tainted medicine into less developed countries. Qatar denied the allegations, claiming that the unheated product poses no severe hazard and was in fact the same fine product we have been supplying for years, which we know and we knew at the time was absolute lies. Let's go a bit further down because there's a lot in this. The New York Times found these largely unnoticed documents, internal memorandums, minutes of the company meetings, and telexes to foreign distributors, a part of the product of connection with the American haemophiliacs lawsuit described below. Director of the Public Health Research Group. In Canada, by the time the blood test began in 1985, about 2,000 people had been infected with HIV and up to 60,000 with hepatitis C. 60,000. 3 suits were brought against the Canadian Red Cross by people who had received tainted blood products. In April 2001, the Supreme Court of Canada found the Canada Red Cross guilty of negligence for failing to screen blood donors effectively for HIV. In France, a former health minister was convicted for failing to adequately screen the blood, leading to deaths for 5 people from AIDS and the infection of 2 others during a key period in 1985. 2 other government officials that continued to use old unheated stock in 85 when a heated product was available received prison sentences. That's what should be happening here, but they've died. They've only got this out here when these people have passed away. These doctors, these civil servants, these companies have passed away and now they can't get them. That's what this is all about. Allegedly, all 3 politicians delayed the introduction of United States blood screening tests in France. Iran, as of 2001, the former head of Iran's blood transfer center Dr. Farhadi went on trial along with two other doctors facing charges including negligence and importing HIV-tainted decides. The case followed complaints by families of around 170 people, many of them children who had haemophilia. Approximately 300 Iranians were infected by the tainted blood. Iraq, 115 haemophiliacs had contracted AIDS. It's unreal, isn't it? It's 35 died in France. It's Ireland. The Lindsay Tribunal was set up in Ireland in 1999 to investigate the infection of haemophiliacs with HIV and hepatitis C from contaminated blood. According to the tribunal, a minimum figure of 250 haemophiliacs were infected with HIV or hepatitis C while receiving treatment. Italy, 1,300 people and 150 children had died from infected blood. In June 2001, an Italian court in Rome ordered the health ministry to pay 351 people who had contracted HIV and hepatitis C through blood transfusions. Although almost 100 victims had already died, the court ruled their families were still entitled to compensation. Japan, 1985. 1,400 Japanese haemophiliacs were exposed to HIV. More than 500 died. In November 1985, the Japanese settled for 420,000. See, this is so the company don't set a president. When they settle, it doesn't become a president and they can't get had again. That is what it's all about. Portugal, 100. Again, United Kingdom. Main article. In the 1970s and 80s, a large number of people in the United Kingdom, most of whom had haemophilia, were infected with hepatitis C and HIV as a result of receiving contaminated clotting factor in the United Kingdom. These were supplied by the National Health Service, with many of the products being imported from the US. The Infected Blood Inquiry Statistics Report, published 2022, set out to establish the true numbers. Those found that around 1,250 people with bleeding disorders were infected with HIV in the UK, and at least a further 2,400 people were infected with hepatitis C. The report concluded that around 3/4 of those infected with HIV and at least 700 people infected with hepatitis C had died. The report found that 8,120 people were chronically infected with hepatitis C 10 years or more after the contaminated blood transfusion. Circumstances under which people were infected by transfusions were different to factor products. For example, our blood transfusion was not imported from the US. Well, it's just unreal, isn't it? Bayer. In 1997, Bayer and other three manufacturers agreed to pay $660 million to settle cases on behalf of more than 6,000 haemophiliacs. 100,000 each, really. The settlement consent denied attorney contingent fees and provided $40 million to pay attorneys as ordered by the court. Jesus. It's just unreal, isn't it? The plaintiffs allege that the companies manufactured the sold blood as a beneficial medicines that were in fact contaminated. Well, they were. Like I said, I'm not going to go through it all. It just makes you mad to think that people get away with it. It's all about the companies not willing to admit that they did something wrong. Now, all I can say to people here, I know this is a bit of a weird one today, but this has been going on throughout my life. They make out on the news that nobody knew about this. I knew in my teens, and I wasn't following the news much then. It was all out there. Everybody knew about it. But the establishment, all the media covered this all up. The one media, to be fair, this time, this journalist from the Mail, she got attacked. And as I said, I saw her yesterday. They threatened the paper and all sorts. They did not want this case going to court, the companies, Bayer and the other companies, and then setting a precedent because it would bankrupt the company. That was it was all about. And it'll be the same with the jab we've been having for the coronavirus. It'll be the same thing. Same with the post office, everything. Civil service turn in on themselves and they push all the their problem to somebody else and nobody gets hurt. That is why the UK is in such a state. So I know this is a bit of a weird one today, but thank you for listening. Please comment, rate, and subscribe, and we'll do another one when I can. Ta da! All the best, guys.